After my father died, I inherited his company and a beach house. That's when my wife gave me an ultimatum. Either you pay for my plastic surgeries and give me $50,000, or I'll divorce you and take every penny. I just smiled and agreed. When I showed a recording to my lawyer, he said, "It's time to start the plan." I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Frank, and at 65 years old I thought I knew everything about betrayal. I was wrong. Dad had been gone for exactly 3 weeks when Lauren cornered me in our kitchen on that gray Tuesday morning. I was still wearing my old flannel pajamas, nursing my second cup of coffee and staring at the stack of condolence cards I hadn't had the strength to answer. The funeral flowers had long since wilted, but their sickly sweet smell seemed to linger in every room of our house. "Frank, we need to talk." Lauren's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. She was already dressed for the day in one of those expensive outfits she'd been buying more frequently lately. A cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. I looked up from my coffee, expecting maybe some gentle words about grief, or perhaps a suggestion that we take that trip to Europe she'd been mentioning. Instead, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach clench. It wasn't sympathy or concern. It was calculation. "Sure, honey. What's on your mind?" I managed to keep my voice steady, though something deep inside me was already bracing for impact. Lauren sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared 30 years of breakfasts, where we'd discussed our dreams, our fears, our plans for retirement. She folded her hands in front of her like she was chairing a business meeting. "Now that your father's estate is settled, I think it's time we discussed some improvements I need to make." She paused, studying my face. "I've been putting off some procedures, some investments in myself because money was tight. But now," my throat felt dry. "What kind of procedures?" "A full facial reconstruction, breast augmentation, maybe a tummy tuck. Dr. Morrison says I'm an excellent candidate, and at 58, this is really my last chance to look the way I deserve to look." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing grocery shopping. I set down my coffee cup, my hand suddenly unsteady. "Lauren, that's major surgery. Are you sure?" "I'm not asking for your permission, Frank." Her tone sharpened. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. The procedures will cost around $30,000, and I'll need another $50,000 for some other investments." "Other investments?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "Personal things, a new wardrobe, maybe a small condo in the city for when I need space, things that will make me happy." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You inherited the business and that beach house in Malibu. It's only fair that I get something too." The beach house. Dad's sanctuary, where he'd taught me to fish, where we'd spent countless weekends talking about life and business and everything that mattered. The place he'd specifically left to me in his will because he knew how much it meant to me. "Lauren, I haven't even decided what to do with the business yet, and the beach house. That's not really about money. It's about memories." Her laugh was cold, nothing like the warm sound I'd fallen in love with 3 decades ago. "Memories don't pay for surgery, Frank. And frankly, I've sacrificed enough years of my life supporting your father's endless medical bills and your little mother-hen routine with him." Something twisted in my chest. Dad had been sick for 2 years before he passed. 2 years of hospital visits, specialist appointments, sleepless nights when his pain was too much for the medications to touch. I'd thought Lauren understood. I'd thought she cared. "He was my father," I said quietly, "and I was patient. Very patient. But now he's gone, and it's time for me to live my life." She leaned forward, her eyes hard as stone. "So here's how this is going to work, Frank. You're going to give me the $80,000 I need, 50 for my personal investments, 30 for the surgeries. You're going to do it willingly and with a smile. And if I don't?" The smile that spread across her face made my blood run cold. "Then I file for divorce, and I take half of everything. The business, the beach house, the investment accounts, all of it. And trust me, Frank, my lawyer says I have an excellent case. 30 years of marriage, and I can easily prove that you neglected me emotionally, especially these last few years when you were so focused on your father." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This woman, who I'd held during her mother's funeral, who I'd supported through her career changes, who I'd loved through every wrinkle and gray hair, was threatening to destroy everything my father had worked his entire life to build. I need some time to think about this, I said, my voice barely audible. You have until Friday. 3 days, Frank. And don't even think about trying to hide assets or do anything clever. I know exactly what you inherited, and I have friends who will make sure I get what's owed to me. She stood up, smoothing down her blazer. Oh, and Frank, don't look so devastated. This could be good for both of us. Good. I'll be happy, and you'll learn what real partnership looks like. With that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the devastating realization that the woman I'd loved for 30 years had just revealed herself to be a complete stranger. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, feeling something inside me break and then slowly begin to harden into something else entirely. Dad had always told me that you only really know someone when money or power is on the line. I'd thought Lauren was different. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. If Lauren wanted to play games with my father's legacy, she was about to learn that some games have consequences she never saw coming. Norman Caldwell had been my friend for 42 years and my lawyer for the last 20. We'd met in college, both awkward accounting majors who bonded over terrible cafeteria coffee and late-night study sessions. He was the kind of man who wore the same style of gray suit every day and kept his desk so organized it looked like a museum display, but his mind was sharp as a razor when it came to legal strategy. When I called him Thursday morning, my hands were still shaking from the conversation I'd recorded with Lauren the night before. Norman, I need to see you today. It's urgent. Frank, are you all right? You sound terrible. His voice carried that gentle concern that had gotten me through Dad's funeral and a dozen other crises over the years. I'm not sure yet. Can you meet me at your office in an hour? Of course. I'll clear my afternoon. Norman's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a modest building downtown. Nothing fancy but solid and reliable, just like the man himself. When I walked in, he took one look at my face and immediately guided me into his private office, closing the door behind us. Sit down, Frank. Tell me what's happened. I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Lauren's voice filled the small office, cold and calculating as she laid out her ultimatum. Norman's expression grew darker with each passing sentence. When the recording ended, he leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his temples. Jesus, Frank, how long has she been like this? I don't know. The honesty of that answer hit me like a physical blow. Maybe always, and I was just too blind to see it. Or maybe losing Dad triggered something in her. Either way, she's not the woman I married. Norman was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk in that rhythmic pattern he'd had since college. Whenever he was thinking hard about something. Frank, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned sooner, but your father made me promise to keep it confidential, unless it became absolutely necessary. My chest tightened. What are you talking about? About 6 months before your father passed, he came to see me. Not about his will, that was already ironclad. He wanted to discuss Lauren. Norman opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. He was worried about her behavior. Some things he'd noticed. What kind of things? Norman opened the folder and pulled out several pages of handwritten notes in Dad's careful script. He documented conversations where Lauren asked inappropriate questions about his medical insurance payouts, his investments, the beach house. She also made several comments about how much easier things would be when he was gone. I felt sick. She said that? According to your father, yes. But Frank, there's more. Norman's voice became even more serious. He hired a private investigator to look into Lauren's activities during his final months. He did what? Your father was a smart man. He suspected something wasn't right, especially after Lauren offered to handle some of his medical appointment scheduling and insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure she wasn't interfering with his care. The room seemed to spin around me. Are you saying she was trying to hurt him? No, not hurt him. But the investigator found evidence that she was systematically pushing for more aggressive treatments, procedures that wouldn't necessarily help him, but would drain his medical insurance faster. She also encouraged him to sign several documents that would have given her power of attorney over his finances. I gripped the arms of my chair so hard my knuckles went white. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because your father made me promise to only reveal it if Lauren ever made a move against you directly. He didn't want to destroy your marriage unless it became clear that she was a genuine threat to you. Norman leaned forward. Frank, that recording you just played me. That's exactly what he was afraid of. I stared at the folder in Norman's hands, feeling like I was looking at evidence of my own blindness. How long has she been planning this? Based on what the investigator found, probably since your father's diagnosis 2 years ago. She's been positioning herself, Frank, learning about the business, the assets, building relationships with people who might be useful in a divorce proceeding. What people? Norman pulled out another sheet of paper. She's been having lunch regularly with Margaret Chen, Dr. Morrison's office manager? Margaret had always been friendly when Lauren had her annual checkups, but I'd never thought much of it. Margaret has access to medical records, including mental health evaluations. If Lauren wanted to build a case that you were emotionally unstable or neglectful during your father's illness, Margaret would be a valuable ally. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. She's been planning this for 2 years. It looks that way, but Frank, here's the thing. She's made a critical mistake. Norman's expression shifted, and I caught a glimpse of the sharp legal mind that had built his successful practice. She assumed your father was a naive old man who didn't understand what she was doing. She was wrong. He pulled out one final document from the folder. Your father also had me create what we call a protection trust for his major assets. The business and the beach house aren't technically part of your personal estate. They're held in trust, which means even in a divorce, Lauren can't touch them. I felt something like hope stirring in my chest for the first time in days. She doesn't know. She has no idea. As far as she knows, you inherited everything directly. But in reality, you're the beneficiary and manager of assets she can never claim. Norman smiled grimly. Your father was protecting you even from the grave. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the mixture of grief and gratitude washing over me. Dad had seen what I'd been too loyal, too trusting to recognize. Norman, what do I do now? We let her reveal more of her hand. The recording you have is good, but it's just the beginning. If she's been planning this for 2 years, she's probably got more strategies we haven't seen yet. He closed the folder. Give her the rope, Frank. Let her hang herself. I don't understand. Tell her you need more time to liquidate some assets to get her the money. Act reluctant, but ultimately cooperative. Meanwhile, we document everything she does, everyone she talks to, every move she makes. Norman's eyes glinted with the satisfaction of a man who'd found the perfect chess move. By the time we're done, she'll have provided us with enough evidence to not only protect your assets, but potentially pursue charges for attempted fraud. I walked out of Norman's office that afternoon feeling like I'd been given a second chance at life. Lauren thought she was playing chess with a grieving widower who couldn't see past his own sorrow. She had no idea she was about to face a man who'd learned the most important lesson his father ever taught him. Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to fight for it. I went home that Thursday evening with Norman's words echoing in my mind. Give her the rope, Frank. Let her hang herself. But as I pulled into our driveway, I wondered if I had the stomach for the kind of deception this would require. 30 years of marriage had trained me to be honest with Lauren, even when it hurt. That training was about to become my greatest asset. Lauren was in the living room when I walked in, perched on the edge of our cream-colored sofa with her laptop open and papers scattered around her. She looked up when she heard my key in the door, and I caught something in her expression, anticipation mixed with barely concealed excitement. Frank, honey, how was your day? Her voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Difficult, I said, which was completely true. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Her posture straightened slightly, and I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one Dad had given us as a wedding present. The irony wasn't lost on me. I want to give you what you need, Lauren. I really do. But $80,000. That's not exactly pocket change. I know it's a lot, but Frank, we can afford it now. She closed her laptop and leaned forward. Your father left you very well provided for. It's not about the money being there, I said carefully. It's about liquidating assets without triggering tax penalties. Norman says I need to be strategic about how I access the inheritance. The mention of Norman made her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. What exactly did you tell Norman? Just that I needed advice on managing the estate. Nothing specific about our conversation. I watched her shoulders relax. But he did mention that some of Dad's assets are in complicated investment vehicles. It might take a few weeks to get you the full amount without losing money to early withdrawal penalties. Lauren's eyes flashed with something that might have been irritation, but she quickly masked it. How long are we talking about? Maybe 6 weeks, 2 months at the outside. I rubbed my temples, playing up my exhaustion. I'm sorry, honey. I know you were hoping to move forward sooner. Well, that's disappointing, but I suppose if it means we don't lose money unnecessarily. She picked up a glossy brochure from the coffee table. Dr. Morrison's office is actually booked out for the next 2 months anyway. Maybe the timing will work out perfectly. That night, after Lauren went to bed, I sat in my home office with a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything I could remember about the last 2 years. Every conversation, every strange comment, every time Lauren had seemed oddly interested in Dad's medical bills or insurance claims. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, I called the private investigator Norman had recommended, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in matrimonial cases. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere Lauren might accidentally encounter us. Sarah was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an understated way of dressing that probably made people forget they'd seen her. "Mr. Patterson," Norman filled me in on the basics. "I understand your wife has been making some concerning financial demands." "It's more than that," I said, pulling out my phone. "I recorded our conversation Tuesday night." Sarah listened to the recording twice, taking notes in a small leather notebook. When it finished the second time, she looked up at me with a grim expression. "Mr. Patterson, this recording is valuable, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. If your wife has been planning this for as long as Norman suspects, there's going to be a trail. Financial records, communications, maybe even evidence of coordination with others." "What kind of coordination?" "People don't usually develop schemes like this in isolation. She's likely been getting advice, possibly from people who've been through similar situations." Sarah closed her notebook. "I'd like to start with her financial records, bank statements, credit card bills, phone records if we can access them legally. We have joint accounts for most things. That's helpful." "What about her personal communications? Email, social media, text messages?" I felt a stab of guilt at the thought of spying on Lauren's private conversations, but then I remembered the coldness in her voice when she'd threatened to destroy everything Dad had worked for. "She uses the computer in my home office sometimes, and we're on the same phone plan." Sarah nodded. "I'll need you to document everything she does over the next few weeks. Where she goes, who she talks to, any unusual behavior. Can you handle that?" "I think so." "There's one more thing, Mr. Patterson. This process can be emotionally difficult. You're going to learn things about your wife that you probably don't want to know. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Dad's manila folder, about the evidence he'd collected while fighting cancer and worrying about his son's future. I need to know the truth. Over the next week, I began to see Lauren with new eyes. I noticed how she always angled her phone away from me when texting. I saw her slip bills and documents into her purse before I could see them. Most tellingly, I watched her face during our conversations about the inheritance. There was a hunger there that had nothing to do with love or partnership. On Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after her initial ultimatum, Lauren announced she was going out for dinner with her sister. I waited until her car disappeared down our street, then called Sarah. "She just left. How long do you need?" 30 minutes, maybe less. I'm 5 minutes away." Sarah arrived with a small toolkit and got to work immediately on Lauren's laptop. While she worked, I went through Lauren's desk drawers and found a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were printouts of emails between Lauren and someone named Marcus Rivera. "Frank, look at this," Sarah called from the computer. "Your wife has been researching divorce law extensively. But more interesting, she's been corresponding with a paralegal named Marcus Rivera about asset discovery strategies." I handed her the folder. "You mean this Marcus Rivera?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up as she scanned the emails. "Mr. Patterson, these emails go back 14 months. She's been planning this since before your father's final diagnosis." The emails were a roadmap of calculated manipulation. Marcus had advised Lauren on how to document Frank's emotional unavailability during his father's illness. He'd suggested she establish relationships with medical professionals who might testify about Frank's mental state. Most damning of all, he'd helped her research the inheritance laws that would apply to her father-in-law's estate. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling up browser history. "She's been researching your father's business partners, looking for potential weak points in the company structure. And look at this. She's had multiple consultations with different divorce attorneys over the past 6 months." I felt sick. While I'd been holding Dad's hand through chemotherapy sessions and staying up all night when his pain medication wasn't working, Lauren had been building a case to destroy everything he'd wanted to leave me. Sarah pulled out a small device and began copying files. "Mr. Patterson, we've got enough here to prove premeditation and conspiracy, but I think there's more. These emails reference meetings and phone calls that aren't documented here. What kind of meetings? She's been talking to people from your father's medical team, and there are references to someone named Dr. Morrison's office, specifically about accessing certain records. I remembered Norman's mention of Margaret Chen. Margaret Chen works for Dr. Morrison. She's been having lunch with Lauren. We need to find out what kind of information she's been sharing. Medical records are confidential, but if she's been discussing your father's mental state or your behavior during his illness. Sarah packed up her equipment as we heard Lauren's car in the driveway. I quickly returned the folder to her desk drawer and met Lauren at the front door. "How was dinner with your sister?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Oh, you know how she is. She talks too much." Lauren kissed my cheek, but her eyes were studying my face. "You look tired, honey. Maybe you should get some rest." That night, lying in bed next to the woman who'd been systematically planning my destruction, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Dad. He'd known. Somehow, even while fighting for his life, he'd seen what I'd been blind to, but now I could see too, and Lauren was about to discover that underestimating a grieving son had been the biggest mistake of her carefully calculated plan. Sarah's phone call came at 7:30 the next morning, just as Lauren was leaving for what she claimed was a doctor's appointment. "Frank, we need to meet today. I found something that changes everything." An hour later, I sat across from Sarah in her small office, watching her face as she laid out a series of documents that made my blood run cold. "Your wife isn't just planning to take half your assets, Frank. She's been systematically stealing from you for the past 18 months. Sarah opened a file folder and pulled out bank statements I'd never seen before. She opened a separate account using your social security number and a slightly altered version of your name. Frank A. Patterson instead of Frank Anthony Patterson. Technically not identity theft since you're married, but definitely fraudulent." I stared at the statements. Deposits totaling over $47,000, money that had been quietly siphoned from our joint accounts in small amounts that I'd never noticed. "How did you find this?" "Credit monitoring. When I ran a comprehensive check on both your financial profiles, this account popped up. She's been very careful, Frank, never taking more than a few $100s at a time, spacing the withdrawals strategically." Sarah pointed to specific entries. "Look at the timing. Every withdrawal corresponds to a period when you were particularly focused on your father's care." My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. December 15th, the day Dad started his final round of chemotherapy. January 22nd, the morning he was rushed to the emergency room. March 3rd, the day before he died. She was stealing from me while I was watching my father die. It gets worse. Sarah pulled out another set of documents. She's also taken out a credit card in your name. The bills were being sent to a post office box she rented 6 months ago. The credit card statements showed charges that painted a picture of Lauren's real life, a life I knew nothing about. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges in cities she'd never mentioned visiting. Most damning of all, multiple charges to something called Rivera Legal Consulting. "She's been paying Marcus Rivera for months," I whispered. $2,500 so far. "And Frank, there's more." I traced some of these hotel charges. "She's been meeting regularly with someone in San Francisco, someone named David Morrison." "Morrison? Like Dr. Morrison?" "His son. David Morrison is a real estate developer, divorced, wealthy, and according to his social media, he's been in a relationship with someone he refers to as L for the past 8 months. The room seemed to tilt around me. She's having an affair. A very calculated affair. David Morrison owns a development company that specializes in luxury condominiums. Specifically, luxury condominiums in areas where property values are expected to skyrocket over the next 5 years. Sarah spread out more documents, property listings, investment prospectuses, email printouts. "Lauren hasn't just been stealing money to fund an affair, Frank. She's been investing in real estate with her boyfriend, using your money as seed capital for deals that are projected to return massive profits." I felt like I was looking at the blueprint of my own destruction. The $50,000 she wants for personal investments is probably the final amount she needs to buy into David Morrison's biggest development project, a luxury resort complex in Napa Valley that breaks ground next month. Sarah's voice was grim. "If this project succeeds, your stolen money could be worth $500,000 in 3 years. And the divorce was always part of the plan. She gets half your legitimate assets, plus whatever profits she can hide from the illegal investments. David Morrison gets a business partner with significant capital, and together they build an empire funded by your father's legacy." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the scope of Lauren's betrayal. This wasn't just greed or midlife crisis. This was a carefully orchestrated theft that had been planned and executed while I grieved for my dying father. Sarah, what can we do? Legally, we have enough evidence to charge her with multiple felonies. Identity theft, fraud, possibly conspiracy. But Frank. Sarah leaned forward. I think there's a better way. What do you mean? Your wife thinks she's got you completely fooled. She believes you're a grieving widower who'll give her anything to avoid conflict. What if we use that against her? Sarah pulled out a small recording device. You said she's been pushing for the money more aggressively lately. What if we give her a chance to really show her hand? Let her think she's won, and then record her admitting to everything she's done? The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. You want me to confront her? Not confront. Confess. Tell her you've discovered some of what she's done, but act like you're too weak and guilt-ridden to fight her. Let her think she can manipulate you into staying quiet. Sarah's eyes gleamed with the kind of strategic thinking that had made her reputation. People like Lauren can't resist gloating when they think they've won. She'll tell you everything, probably justify it all as being your fault somehow. That evening, I prepared for the performance of my life. I set up recording equipment in 3 different locations around our house, charged my phone, and rehearsed what I would say. Norman had coached me on the legal language I needed Lauren to acknowledge, the specific admissions that would make our case bulletproof. Lauren came home at 8:30, later than usual, with the satisfied look of someone who'd spent the day making profitable decisions. She found me in the kitchen, sitting at our table with a glass of whiskey and a stack of papers. Frank, what's all this? I looked up at her, letting her see the exhaustion and defeat I'd been carrying for weeks. Lauren, we need to talk. She sat down across from me, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I know, I said quietly. Know what? About the account, about the credit card, about David Morrison. I watched her face go through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, defiance. Frank, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you stole almost $50,000 from me while I was taking care of my dying father? My voice broke just enough to sound genuinely devastated. Can you explain why you've been living a double life for months? Lauren sat back in her chair, and I saw the exact moment when she decided to stop pretending. Her whole posture changed, became more confident, more predatory. You want to know the truth, Frank? Fine, here's the truth. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that cold tone I'd learned to recognize. You've been a pathetic excuse for a husband for years. All you cared about was your precious daddy and his precious business. When was the last time you took me somewhere nice? When was the last time you bought me something beautiful? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered? I said nothing, just stared at her with what I hoped looked like broken acceptance. David makes me feel alive, Frank. He sees my potential, my intelligence. He doesn't treat me like some nursemaid for dying old men. Her voice was getting stronger, more vicious. And yes, I took money. Money that should have been invested in our future instead of wasted on medical bills for a man who was going to die anyway. Lauren, don't you dare judge me. I've given you 30 years of my life, and what do I have to show for it? A house in the suburbs and a husband who cares more about his dead father than his living wife. She stood up, pacing now. David and I are building something real, something profitable. In 5 years, we'll be worth millions. And you know what? You're going to help us get there. I don't understand. Lauren smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on her face. You're going to give me the $80,000 I asked for. You're going to do it quietly, and without any more questions. And then you're going to divorce me, and give me half of everything else. And if I don't, then I'll destroy you. Her voice was utterly calm now. I'll tell everyone how you emotionally abused me during your father's illness, how you neglected me, isolated me, made me feel worthless. Margaret Chen will testify about your erratic behavior at medical appointments. Dr. Morrison will confirm that I sought counseling for depression caused by your treatment of me. She sat back down, leaning across the table until her face was inches from mine. And if that doesn't work, I'll make sure the IRS knows about some creative accounting your father did in his final years, some deductions that might not hold up under scrutiny. My father had been scrupulously honest in all his business dealings, but I realized Lauren was probably counting on me being too grief-stricken to fight a prolonged audit. "You've thought of everything," I said. "I have, because unlike you, Frank, I'm not content to just drift through life waiting for other people to make me happy. I take what I want." She reached across the table and patted my hand with false sympathy. "Don't look so devastated, honey. This way, we both get what we need. You get to keep your precious memories and your guilt, and I get to live the life I deserve." I looked down at our joined hands, hers soft and manicured from years of not working, mine rough and scarred from years of building the business alongside Dad. "I need some time to process all this," I said finally. "Of course you do. Take all the time you need." Lauren stood up, smoothing her skirt. "But Frank, don't take too long. David and I have deadlines to meet." After she went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen with the recordings that would destroy her. But strangely, what I felt wasn't triumph or satisfaction. What I felt was the quiet, powerful certainty that Dad would have been proud of me for finally learning to fight back. The next morning I woke to find Lauren humming in the kitchen, making herself elaborate French toast with fresh berries, a breakfast she'd never bothered to make in the 30 years I'd known her. She looked radiant, almost glowing with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd finally won the game she'd been playing. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, not looking up from her cooking. "I hope you slept well." I hadn't slept at all. I'd spent the night listening to the recordings over and over, each replay making Lauren's betrayal feel more surreal and more devastating. But I'd also spent those sleepless hours with Norman and Sarah, planning the final phase of our strategy. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," I said, pouring myself coffee with hands that were steadier than they'd been in weeks. "Oh?" Lauren finally looked at me, and I saw the predator behind her bright smile. "And what conclusions did you reach?" "I think you're right, about everything." I sat down at the table, letting my shoulders slump with defeat. "I was a terrible husband during Dad's illness. I did neglect you, and maybe you deserve to be happy." Lauren's smile widened, but her eyes remained calculating. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Frank. I called Norman this morning. I asked him to start liquidating some of the assets so I can get you the money you need. How long will that take? He thinks he can have $50,000 available by Monday. The rest will take another week or two." I rubbed my temples, playing up my exhaustion. "There are some tax implications we need to handle carefully." Lauren moved to the sink, rinsing her dishes with movements that seemed almost choreographed. "Frank, there's something else we need to discuss." "What's that?" "David and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if we made our relationship public sooner rather than later." She turned to face me, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "It's going to come out eventually, and controlling the narrative will be important for both of us." The casualness with which she discussed destroying our marriage made my stomach turn. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I think I should move out this weekend, just temporarily, while we work out the divorce details. It'll make everything cleaner, less complicated." Her voice carried that same businesslike tone she'd used when threatening to destroy me. "David has a beautiful condo in Pacific Heights that I could use." I forced myself to nod slowly. "If you think that's best." "I do. And Frank?" Lauren's expression softened into something that might have been genuine sympathy if I hadn't known better. "I want you to know that I don't hate you. We want different things. You want to live in the past, honoring your father's memory, holding on to old traditions. I want to build something new." "I understand." That afternoon, while Lauren was out running errands, which I now knew meant meeting with David Morrison or Marcus Rivera or one of her other co-conspirators, I met with Norman and Sarah in Norman's office. "She's moving out this weekend," I told them. "She wants to make their relationship public." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's actually perfect for us. The more confident she gets, the more evidence she'll create." "Has she mentioned any specific timeline for the divorce proceedings?" "She wants me to file next week. She said it would look better if I initiated it, like I was being generous and understanding." Norman laughed bitterly. "Even her divorce strategy is manipulative. If you file first, claiming irreconcilable differences, it makes her look like the injured party instead of the perpetrator." "What do?" "We let her move out," Sarah said. "But first, we need to document everything in the house. Every asset, every piece of valuable property, every document that might be relevant to the case. If she's planning to take things that don't belong to her, we need proof of what was here before she left." "There's something else," Norman added. I want to confront Margaret Chen before Lauren has a chance to coach her story. If she's been sharing confidential medical information, that's a serious breach of ethics that could ruin her career. She might be willing to cooperate with us if she understands the legal jeopardy she's in. That evening, I helped Lauren pack her clothes with the kind of solicitude that would have been touching if it weren't all an act. She moved through our bedroom like she was cherry-picking items from an estate sale, taking jewelry I'd given her for anniversaries, selecting only her most expensive clothes, packing photo albums that contained pictures of her family but none of our shared memories. "I'll probably need to come back for more things over the next few weeks," she said, closing her largest suitcase, "just until we can work out a more permanent arrangement for dividing our belongings." "Of course. This is your home, too." Lauren paused in her packing and looked at me with what seemed like genuine surprise. "You're being much more reasonable about this than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Anger, maybe. Accusations. Demands that I stay and work things out." She shrugged. Most men don't handle rejection very well. The irony was staggering. She thought she was rejecting me, when in reality, I was about to expose her for the criminal she'd revealed herself to be. But I just nodded sadly. "I love you, Lauren. I want you to be happy, even if that means you can't be happy with me." For just a moment, something flickered across her face that might have been guilt or regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar calculation. "You're a good man, Frank, just not the right man for me." Sunday morning, I watched from our front window as Lauren loaded her car with enough belongings for an extended stay. David Morrison pulled up just as she finished, driving a silver BMW that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of polished confidence that came from inherited wealth and natural charm. He helped Lauren with her bags, his hand lingering on her lower back in a gesture of casual intimacy that made my chest tighten. Then they both looked toward the house, and Lauren waved at me with the bright smile of someone who believed she'd successfully fooled the old fool inside. I waved back and watched them drive away together, probably heading toward the life Lauren had been planning while stealing from me and lying to my face for 18 months. Monday morning, I was in Norman's office when Margaret Chen arrived for the meeting we'd arranged. She was a small, nervous woman in her 50s who kept glancing toward the door like she was planning an escape route. "Mrs. Chen," Norman began, "we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. We have some questions about your interactions with Lauren Patterson." "I don't understand what this is about," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a folder on the table between them. "Mrs. Chen, we have evidence that you've been sharing confidential medical information about Frank Patterson and his late father with Lauren Patterson. Information that she's used to build a fraudulent legal case." Margaret's face went pale. Lauren and I are friends. We've had lunch a few times. Lunch meetings where you discussed Frank's behavior during his father's medical treatments," Norman said. "Conversations where you agreed to provide testimony about his mental state and emotional stability. She said she was worried about him. She said he'd been acting erratically, that she was concerned for his well-being." Margaret's hands were shaking now. "I thought I was helping." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out printed emails. "These are communications between Lauren Patterson and Marcus Rivera, discussing specific medical information that only you would have access to. Information about when Frank attended appointments, how he interacted with medical staff, details about his father's insurance coverage and treatment decisions." Margaret stared at the emails, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Oh God. Oh my God, what have I done?" "You've potentially compromised your professional license and opened yourself up to significant legal liability," Norman said firmly but not unkindly. "But Mrs. Chen, you have an opportunity to make this right." "How?" "By telling the truth. By helping us document exactly what Lauren Patterson asked you to do and what information you shared with her." Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Chen, Lauren Patterson isn't concerned about her husband's well-being. She's been systematically stealing from him and planning to destroy his life. You've been used as a pawn in a very sophisticated fraud scheme." Margaret broke down completely then, sobbing as she confessed to months of manipulation by Lauren. She'd shared information about Frank's attendance at medical appointments, his emotional reactions to his father's treatments, and details about the family's insurance coverage. She'd even agreed to testify in divorce proceedings about Frank's unstable behavior during his father's illness. She made it sound like she was protecting him, Margaret whispered through her tears. She said he was having a breakdown, and that she needed documentation to get him help. By the time Margaret left Norman's office, we had her signed statement detailing every conversation she'd had with Lauren, every piece of information she'd inappropriately shared, and her agreement to testify truthfully about Lauren's manipulation. "That's the last piece," Norman said after Margaret left. "We now have documentation of theft, fraud, conspiracy, breach of confidentiality, and perjury. Lauren Patterson isn't just going to lose this divorce case, Frank. She's going to face serious criminal charges." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted and sad and strangely empty. In the space of 2 weeks, I'd discovered that my wife of 30 years was a stranger, a criminal, and a woman capable of cruelties I couldn't have imagined. But as I drove home to the empty house where Lauren and I had once been happy, I also felt something else. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that Dad's legacy was safe and that his faith in me had been justified. The game was almost over, and for the first time since Dad died, I was ready to win. The call came on Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Lauren had first delivered her ultimatum. I was sitting in Dad's beach house, watching the sunrise over the Pacific and trying to remember what peace felt like, when my phone rang. "Frank, it's Norman. She's filed for divorce." I'd been expecting this call, but hearing it still sent a chill through me. "What are the terms?" "Everything we anticipated. She's claiming emotional abandonment, seeking half of all marital assets, and requesting immediate temporary support of $5,000 per month." Norman's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "She's also submitted a psychological evaluation requesting that you undergo mental health counseling before any major financial decisions are made." "The evaluation from Dr. Morrison?" "The very same Dr. Morrison whose son she's been sleeping with and whose office manager she corrupted. The whole thing is so brazenly corrupt it's almost insulting." I walked out onto the deck Dad had built with his own hands, breathing in the salt air that had always calmed him during the worst storms of his life. "What happens now?" "Now we spring our trap. I've scheduled a meeting with Lauren and her attorney for Monday morning. She thinks we're going to discuss settlement terms." Norman paused. "Frank, are you ready for this?" I thought about Dad's final weeks, when he'd been too weak to walk, but had still insisted on reviewing the business accounts every morning because he knew Lauren was watching and waiting. I thought about the trust documents he'd created to protect me, the private investigator he'd hired while fighting cancer, the manila folder he'd left with Norman just in case. I'm ready. Monday morning, I sat in the conference room at Norman's law office, wearing Dad's favorite blue tie and feeling calmer than I had in months. Lauren arrived 15 minutes late with an attorney I didn't recognize. A sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she specialized in taking wealthy men to the cleaners. Lauren barely looked at me as she sat down, but I caught her glancing around Norman's modest office with the kind of disdain I'd never noticed before. She was dressed in a new outfit, probably bought with money she'd stolen from our joint accounts, and she wore jewelry I'd never seen before, gifts from David Morrison most likely. "Gentlemen, ladies," Lauren's attorney began, "I think we can make this process relatively painless for everyone involved. My client is prepared to be reasonable in her demands, given the circumstances of the marriage." Norman smiled politely. "I appreciate that, Ms. Rodriguez. But before we discuss terms, I think there are some facts that need to be addressed." He opened a thick file folder and pulled out the first set of documents. "Let's start with the separate bank account Mrs. Patterson opened using her husband's social security number and a falsified name." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lauren's face went pale, but her attorney maintained her composure. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Caldwell, but—" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact." Norman spread the bank statements across the table. "Mrs. Patterson systematically stole $47,328 from joint marital accounts over the course of 18 months. Lauren's attorney picked up the statements, her confidence visibly wavering as she scanned the evidence. Lauren herself said nothing, but I watched her hands clench into fists under the table. "Furthermore," Norman continued, pulling out more documents, "Mrs. Patterson opened a credit card in her husband's name without his knowledge, racking up an additional $12,000 in debt that she used to finance an extramarital affair." "Frank," Lauren spoke for the first time, her voice shaking slightly, "you know this isn't what it looks like." "Actually, Mrs. Patterson," Norman said, "it's exactly what it looks like. But let's continue, shall we?" He pulled out the printed emails from Marcus Rivera. "Mrs. Patterson also engaged in conspiracy to commit fraud, working with a paralegal to develop strategies for stealing marital assets and falsifying evidence of spousal abuse. Lauren's attorney set down the papers and looked at her client with the expression of someone who just realized she'd been lied to. "Lauren, we need to discuss. And then there's the matter of the corrupted medical professional," Norman continued relentlessly. "Mrs. Patterson coerced Margaret Chen, a medical office manager, into sharing confidential patient information and agreeing to provide false testimony in divorce proceedings." I watched Lauren's face cycle through fear, anger, and desperation. She looked like a trapped animal, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered her voice on the recording, coldly explaining how she planned to destroy me and steal Dad's legacy. "But perhaps most interesting of all," Norman said, pulling out one final set of documents, "is the evidence of Mrs. Patterson's ongoing financial fraud conspiracy with David Morrison, using stolen marital funds to invest in real estate ventures that would have netted them considerable profits." Lauren's attorney stood up abruptly. "We need a recess. I need to confer with my client." "Actually," Norman said calmly, "I don't think that will be necessary. You see, Detective Williams from the fraud division is waiting outside. I think Mrs. Patterson has some more pressing concerns than divorce proceedings." The blood drained from Lauren's face. "Frank, please. We can work this out. You don't have to do this." I looked at her across the conference table. This woman I'd loved for 30 years, who'd held my hand at Dad's funeral while planning to rob his legacy. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. "Lauren, you told me that you take what you want, that you're not content to drift through life waiting for other people to make you happy." I stood up, buttoning Dad's jacket. "Well, I've learned something about taking what I want, too." Detective Williams entered the room with 2 uniformed officers. Lauren's attorney immediately stepped away from her client, probably already composing the withdrawal letter she'd file before the day was over. "Lauren Patterson," Detective Williams said, "you're under arrest for identity theft, credit card fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft of marital property." As they read Lauren her rights, she looked at me with an expression of pure hatred. "You'll regret this, Frank. I'll make sure you regret this." "The only thing I regret," I said quietly, "is not seeing who you really were 30 years ago." 3 months later, I was back at Dad's beach house, this time with Sarah Chen, who'd become not just my investigator but a close friend. Lauren had pled guilty to multiple felony charges and was serving 18 months in federal prison. David Morrison's development company was under investigation for investment fraud, and several of his previous projects had been revealed as elaborate Ponzi schemes. "Have you heard anything about the restitution?" Sarah asked, sipping coffee on the deck where Dad used to read his morning paper. "Norman says I should recover most of the stolen money, plus damages. The court ordered Lauren to sell all the real estate investments she made with David Morrison." I smiled grimly. "Turns out their luxury resort project was a complete fabrication. The land they bought doesn't even have water access. So she lost everything. Everything except her prison uniform and whatever dignity she has left." I looked out at the ocean, feeling the kind of peace I hadn't experienced since before Dad got sick. "She called me last week." "What did she say?" "That she was sorry. That she'd been confused and desperate. That David Morrison had manipulated her into doing things she never would have done on her own." I shook my head. Even from prison, she's still lying. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you miss her? Miss what you thought you had?" I considered the question seriously. "I miss the woman I thought I married. But that woman never really existed. The real Lauren is the one who stole from me while I watched my father die. The real Lauren is the one who planned to destroy everything Dad worked for. What will you do now?" I'd been thinking about that question for months. The business was thriving under new management, with systems Dad and I had built proving stronger than either of us had imagined. The beach house had become my sanctuary, a place where I could remember Dad without the contamination of Lauren's presence. "I'm thinking about traveling. Dad always wanted to see Ireland, where his grandparents came from. Maybe I'll go for both of us." I smiled at Sarah. "And I'm thinking about dating again, when I'm ready." "Good for you." That evening, I sat alone on the deck with a glass of Dad's favorite whiskey, watching the sun set over the Pacific. My phone had been quiet all day. No more threatening calls from Lauren's associates. No more legal emergencies. No more crises manufactured by someone who'd never really loved me. I pulled out the letter Dad had written to Norman, the one that had started this whole journey toward the truth. I'd read it dozens of times, but tonight I wanted to read it again. "Son," it began in Dad's careful handwriting, "if you're reading this, it means my concerns about Lauren were justified. I pray I'm wrong, but if I'm not, remember this. Love is not about what you can give someone. Real love is about who someone chooses to be when they think no one is watching." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my wallet. Dad had been wrong about one thing. Someone had been watching. He'd been watching, protecting me even from his hospital bed, making sure I'd have the tools I needed to survive Lauren's betrayal. The stars were coming out over the ocean, bright and clear in the unpolluted air. Tomorrow I'd start planning that trip to Ireland. I'd visit the towns where Dad's family had lived, maybe learn something about the kind of strength that had carried our family through generations of hardships. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be, in the house Dad had built, protected by the love he'd shown me and the wisdom he'd shared. Lauren had tried to steal my future, but she'd never understood that everything worth having had been given to me long before she'd entered my life. I raised my glass to the stars and to Dad's memory, grateful for the lesson he'd taught me even in death. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let someone destroy what you're meant to protect.